Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Melanie, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you today?
I am doing great, Eric. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing not too bad. It's Friday, so the weekend's here, so can't complain at all. Let's do a quick intro for you. Why don't you introduce yourself super quick, and then we'll jump into the question from the last guest, and then I'm sure we'll have a very eventful and fruitful conversation.
Well, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm Melanie Cumbee. I am based in Southern California, in Tustin specifically. I have been leading organizational transformation and employee well-being strategies for over 25 years. So it's my passion and really my area of focus that I just love. And I think some of my favorite things are just really integrating that science of well-being and learning and positive psychology and kind of other evidence-based strategies to create an immersive employee experience. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm excited about that. And then most recently, what I have been doing is I've been leveraging and operationalizing research from the Blue Zones. And I suspect we'll talk about that as well. I did that with Adventist Health. They're a faith-based health system in California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii with about 30,000 employees in 23 sites. So that's a little about me, but my most important job for sure has been being mom to my three amazing sons. And I now have three amazing daughter-in-laws to boot. So that's been kind of the joy and my favorite thing that I've gotten to do in my life.
Very nice. The three daughter-in-laws as well. Sounds like they've all done not too bad for themselves, I guess you could say. So a question from the last guest. What is the most exciting / memorable sporting event that you remember either as a participant or a witness?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Most exciting sporting event. Well, we have something in common. I learned from listening to one of your podcasts. So I was a high school athlete, but I played soccer all growing up. And I think one of my highlight moments, I grew up in Georgia, and our Hawks, DISA Hawks, DeKalb Youth Soccer Association Hawks, won the Southern Regional Division and went to Texas for kind of the next level. And that was just such an amazing experience. We didn't win, but it was just such a highlight to be in that level of competition. So love that, and still follow women's soccer to this day.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
going on trips with your teams, like just to experience that stuff is always super, like you're away with your team, you're in a new place, you get to do a thing that you like to do at the same time. It's can't really go wrong. And even when the results don't really go your way, it's kind of you take away the experience and then you're like, okay, we lost, but that's fine. And then you move on later and you remember all those things. It's yeah, for sure. Okay, so a little bit of your background. We talked beforehand. You studied kinesiology. Where did was an athletic sci kind of livelihood living always what you wanted to kind of pursue, or did that come later?
I think it came a little bit later. I thought I started my undergraduate degree in teaching and secondary education. And I think part of the reason I did that is I thought I might go into mission work at some point, and so do some teaching overseas. And also, I was at this very large public university, and there was a physical education kinesiology. It was physical education back in the day, degree. And frankly, only the football players were in it, and it just didn't have a great academic reputation. And so at that time, I thought,
Shocking.
you know what I'm saying? So anyway, so I didn't do it, but I got married in college and moved to California because I was going to college in the South and started raising my family. And somewhere along the way, I'm like, oh my gosh, my passion has always been athletics and, the human body. And that's really what I want to study. So while I was raising my family, I got my undergraduate degree in kinesiology and then went on to do my graduate degree in exercise science and health promotion. So kind of just knew, I knew like deep down, that's what I loved. And when I got my first anatomy book in my undergraduate degree, I will never forget, I cried. I did. I cried, Eric, because I just love the human body. You look at all the different systems, right? The nervous, skeletal, cardiovascular system. It is unbelievable, like how we're put together. And I just wanted to know and understand everything in that book and spent so much time in the cadaver lab. My family was a little worried, but I just love it. I just love the human body.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the what I tell people a lot is like the human body is so resilient and so fragile at the same time, and it's really, really remarkable. Like one little thing can go wrong and everything just, and then at the same time, the ability to recover from crazy injuries is like it's nuts. Um, so okay, so you get your degree
Mhm.
and exercise science and kinesiology, at least in my mind, lends itself towards working with athletes or maybe a personal trainer or something along those lines. So where along the lines did like walk us through that those first couple jobs and how that shaped where you ended up? Because I think one big theme, and we mentioned this on the phone when we talked, was everyone's path is different. A lot of people who listen to this are around my age saying like, "Oh, why don't I know what I want to do with my life yet?" And it's like you got plenty of time. So I think I try and really highlight those stories of how people want to do one thing and they end up doing something else and they really enjoyed it. So the first couple jobs were you still aiming into that athletic sort of sense or what was the mindset like around that time for you?
Yeah. And I'll just say kind of to reflect back on what you were just saying, trying to find that space. And sometimes you go to school kind of like I did. I was starting in teaching because I thought that was a good idea. Um, and how can you tap into something that you're passionate about that you can also make a living at? They have to
Yes.
come together, right? But for me, it was personal training. So I stepped into personal training. I got a personal training, certification. But I was also doing some at that time, it's corporate wellness, it was kind of the term. And so I'd go to places like Google, or Pacific Bell, which I think no longer exists. That was a telephone company, and do classes and very basic stuff. And at that time, organizations, if they had maybe a lunch and learn on, walking and a gym and, you got broccoli for free in your cafeteria, you had a wellness program. Like that was killing it. But anyway, so I would do some consulting for that. But the bulk of my time, really, while I was raising my family, was as a personal trainer. And I have always, always loved just the ability to support people wherever they are on their path. I do not believe in kind of the cookie cutter, I know what's best for you kind of approach. I don't think that works well. And I think we have some good kind of evidence-based principles, right, that we want to share with people. But you have autonomy, you have the ability to choose, and I'm here to be at the elbow and to support you. So love that. And a lot of my clients were older. So 70s, like, now it doesn't sound very old because I'm getting closer. But anyway, 60s, 70s, some into their 80s. But I really, when I was doing my undergraduate, I thought a lot about gerokinesiology. Just love the study of aging. And so it just so happened that a lot of my clients were older. And what was fun about that is I just saw tremendous benefit. It was never too late to start strength training or balance training or working on some of those things. So that's mainly what I did until my sons were a little bit older. They were all in high school. And I had a really amazing opportunity to kind of from the ground up step into a large health system in Southern California. And all they had was a name for their well-being program. It was called The Good Life. And I remember when they told me that name, I was like, ugh, I, I don't know if I like that. I really came to love it because, Eric, how you define your good life might be different than how I define mine.
Hmm.
And so I actually, over time, I grew to really love that because it empowered the person to define what their good life looked like and what motivated them to have that good life. So anyway, that was kind of my path to really get into full-time kind of well-being and health promotion strategy. And then I've spent the bulk of my career doing that in large health systems.
Do you see the results of the work that you do now firsthand? And what I mean by that is, like for me as a soccer coach, I find doing small group and private training much more rewarding, because I can personalize what each player needs, and it's less of a it's easier to see the improvement in a youth player kind of when you have that one-on-one time with them. And I can imagine for personal training for somebody who maybe isn't an athlete or isn't they don't even have to be an athlete, but they're not already familiar with the gym, it's a lot easier to see those results than if you were to say try to implement a strategy for a corporation. Um, is that a piece that you miss, or do you still see those results in your work now?
Yeah, there are pros and cons. I love that individual connection, and you really could see because you're with that person so frequently. I spent more time with my clients than I spent with my friends, really at that time of my life, right? Because I'd see them 2 or 3 times a week. And so you really could see their progress over time and not just their progress, but how it impacted their life, which
Hmm.
was amazingly cool. So I love that. But what I felt, and one of the reasons why I made that transition into kind of the corporate side of things, is I really wanted the ability to impact more people and to create a ripple effect. And so, by offering those kind of well-being strategies, tools, resources to people in the workplace, it wasn't just about the person that was there. It was also about their family, right? Their spouse, partner, their kids, the community that they live in. And so that the potential for the ripple effect was kind of what pulled me in that direction. So there were beautiful things about each one of those. But in the corporate setting, it takes a lot longer to really see the needle move when you're looking at a population of people, right?
Hmm.
That takes quite a while.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I heard a quote, I was just like scrolling through YouTube or whatever, and the the premise was kind of like, how do you convince someone who's maybe down in the dumps, or they don't want to exercise, or they're just on the couch and eating Doritos or whatever, like how do you get them to change their mindset? And the answer was kind of like, you if they have no they need to have pride in themselves, and if they don't, then they like you can't make them, like you can't force them to go do that. um and so we were kind of touching on this before we started recording, and that's something that I find a little bit interesting about the transition from the personal training to the corporate side, because you can, and we talked about this as well, you can give an amazing strategy, but you can't like make them follow it. Whereas with the personal one, you know that they want to be there, and so that gives an added sort of motivating factor, at least for me, when I am training people, gives me like an added factor. It's like, okay, they want to be here, they want to get better, and it makes it easier and more, um I don't have to, it's not like pulling teeth, like like you know what I mean, to make them like, okay, we're gonna do one more set. It's like, oh, but it's like no, they want to do one more set, or they, if the last rep wasn't good, they want to do another rep, they want to get another pass or another shot. So that sort of phenomenon is interesting to me as a trainer, or as a advisor or consultant, or whatever word you want to use for that. So how do you kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there's so many pieces to that so many different rabbit trails we could
Yeah,
go down.
we got time.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so this is an all-day podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm in. Um, so I think one of the things that has been critical to me, a couple different things, in a workplace, I think it's important to create kind of a current of well-being. So how do you immerse people in an environment and in a culture that that has a pull or a gravitational pull towards well-being. So what would that look like? It might look like standing desks. It might look like just an abundance of kind of healthy food, and maybe that's discounted. It might be salad potluck Fridays. It's going to be volunteering. Maybe you get a day off a month, a paid day volunteer off a month to go volunteer. It's team building, it's skill building for your managers, it's understanding your purpose. Maybe there's a purpose workshop. Um, but your environment is pulling, and there's not, there's not soda and candy everywhere. Like, bring it in if you want, but in our workplace, we're not going to inundate you with what for some people is absolute kryptonite, right? Like it's hard to resist candy. I love chocolate. Like if there's a jar of chocolate there, I'm your best.
I'm grabbing some. Yeah.
Yeah, I will be there. So there's some interesting things, and we hit on this a little bit around behavioral economics and the default in the environment. And so it's those pulls where people still have free will, if you will. They still have autonomy to make their choices. No one's going to tackle them for bringing a Coke into the building. Do it if that's what you want. But we're not going to serve Coke at our company events. So it's a fine balance, but there's a messaging that is integrated through and through, even on the benefits level. So, if we say we value PTO, we want you to take time off, vacation, but it's really hard to take, or we're way below the industry average. Well, what kind of message is that sending? So you have to really look at all the different components that are actually part of the employee experience, and they have to be integrated and consistent and have integrity. And if they don't, and we've all probably felt this, you feel it, right? When there's those gaps and disconnect, you know that something is amiss, and maybe it's not as altruistic when the company says we care about your well-being as we thought it was, because it's not fully integrated into the daily experience of the employee.
That makes sense. There's two pieces to that as well from a company perspective that I want to get your thoughts on. And the first is that um soda and like pizza is much cheaper than
Yeah.
getting other things. Uh and I've seen companies that do that. They'll be like, okay, yeah, and then we'll have an event and it's just 15 pizzas stacked up and a bunch of 2 liters of soda. And I go into that and then I'm like, oh, it's like I don't want to eat, but I also don't want to be like the outcast over here. Like, because people will make comments, which is fine. Um, but then and then the other thing that I wanted to touch on is I feel like the scenario in which the company is the person's kind of identity. Like you don't really see people as lifers in companies anymore. They're not there for 20 years anymore. They're there for 2 years. And oftentimes those people that are bouncing around have other aspect. It's like, okay, if I'm going to eat healthy, like they're already eating healthy. And so to have the company be the maybe driving force to set their default at in those 8 hours at work. But then if you're hybrid working, you're only there once or twice a week or whatever the case may be is, and there's no like like how do you kind of work with that as
Mhm.
a consultant for them? Because it seems like there's not a great, at least, well, I've thought about it for about, I don't know, 5 minutes, but it doesn't seem like there's a great answer. So I'd like, what are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah. Well, I think we're still working through those things, right? This multimodality kind of work situation that we're in now, which is our new normal. Like it is here to stay. So and it has to start at the top. So if a company says that well-being is our people are the most important thing, and because of that, we're gonna do everything within our power to empower you to be your best self here at work. That's the bottom line. Um, the thing that still is being figured out is how can you be your best self wherever you're working for us, right? So in a way, the workplace is kind of easy because that's an environment that is controlled by the organization. The home is a different matter. So what I'm seeing companies do, and what I've talked about with companies is, how can you set up some education, and some kind of specific perks? They're not in your office using paper and doing stuff. So how else can you invest in them at home? Can you send them a CSA, a community sponsored agriculture box, if they want that, to their house that's full of fresh fruits and vegetables from the farm? Can they get a package that has a standing desk? Are they permitted? What are the norms? Are they permitted to take breaks every, I don't know, 5 minutes, an hour? Is it okay if they have stepped away from their computer? Are they encouraged to do walking meetings? Right. So I've done that with my team. I have worked remotely for the last 4 years. And I'll say, hey guys, let's go do a walking meeting. We're all headed out, grab your phone, grab a notepad, and let's go do a walking meeting. So I think it's different, and it's requiring some more creativity. And I think organizations have to kind of shift a little bit about, this person isn't in the office, and we're not investing in them here. So how can we invest in their workplace, which is their home office, which we have said we're okay with? So I think we're still figuring it out, but those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. I think a lot of that could also come down to hiring practices because if you trust your employees to get the job done, then you're not really as concerned if they're like if this is like idle for 20 minutes because you know they took their dog for a walk or whatever the case maybe is. Um, and that something is something that I think is a very big, even in my short working career, I've seen that switch. Um, I've seen companies where it's like you have to be here from this time to this time, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like I heard the term "don't clock watch," and it's like, well, people are clock watching because that's the time that you said that people could leave, and if they're done with their work, like, what do you just want them to sit there and whatever? And then to the flip side of flexible and all these things. So. I don't know. It just seems I'm just kind of along for the ride, I guess, and being able to talk to people who have some level of experience, maybe advising companies on how to handle that is super interesting. Um, okay, I want to go back to your personal training. You're starting to get into the corporate wellness type sphere. What's the adjustment like for you, switching kind of roles?
Mhm. It wasn't that huge of a transition. I kind of waded into it. I worked as a consultant for a little while, for about part-time, for about 3 years, as I kind of built up the program, and then it became, it got to a point where it needed a full-time kind of lead and a team. And so I hired a team and did that. So I had time to kind of wade in and really thoughtfully build out a well-being program and strategy. So started at the corporate office, which had a gym, which was great, and then began to kind of move that strategy out and systematize it for the 6 hospital campuses. So it was gradual enough that it gave me kind of time and space to wade in and to learn, because I hadn't done anything like that up to that point. And so there was a lot of learning along the way. And you have things that just flop. One flop that I had was, um, you know, uh, clinicians are kind of notorious for not taking care of themselves. And so that was always a key focus for me. And they're taking care of patients, right? So that's kind of the ultimate goal. And, happy, healthy physicians, nurses are going to have happier and healthier patients. That's kind of common sense. But anyway, so always trying to figure out how to help them de-stress in between patients. Oftentimes they could not leave the floor. So it was a beautiful idea to say, hey, at your break, go outside, enjoy the California sunshine, take a walking break. But for so many, that was not a realistic idea. They just really couldn't get off the floor for a variety of reasons. So my flop was, I thought, well, I know, let's give them a different type of exercise. They are kind of walking around. The average nurse gets around 7,500 steps a day, which is better than the average American, like a lot better. But maybe they need a different type of exercise. So I put these fit desk bikes in some break rooms where they could sit. And my thought was, oh, during their work, they could sit on these fit desks, pedal, get a different type of physical activity, and chart on the electronic medical record though that just became like a lunch bag hanger. Like they no nobody used those. And it just turned out that what they really needed was just a quiet space to reset. They didn't need more exercise or another place to spend extra moments in the electronic medical record. That's the last thing they wanted to do. So, so that's the personal trainer in me, probably, right? I
Yeah.
came in thinking, oh, more exercise, and that isn't what they needed at that point in their day.
I would imagine there's a big shift in when you're doing corporate wellness for a hospital system or a medical system in the into the psychological. Some of the stuff that they would see and deal with, I would imagine, can be quite stressful, or traumatic even in some cases. Was that a big learning curve for you to start to incorporate? Like even in this example, right? You talk about bikes and like, no, they just needed a quiet place to like reset mentally. Um, did that take you a while to realize, or did you have somebody that you were working with that was like, all right, we need to like focus, like shift our focus onto what they need? Um, how was, because it's a very different type of wellness than somebody that just needs to eat healthier and maybe go for a couple walks. Like it's a different type of thing. Because most, well, I think I'm a anecdotally, I think you could say most nurses and doctors who are walking around are generally healthier than the average person. So it's a different type of wellness that they're looking for. Is that maybe that's not true? I don't know.
Well, you would think that. I understand where that assumption comes from. But when we looked at our health risk, when we looked at how folks were doing, they looked like everybody else in America.
Oh no, that's not good. You can't have doctors that aren't healthy telling other unhealthy people how to be unhealthy. It's
It was painful. And again, some of the hardest things for all of us are probably practicing what we preach,
hmm
right? So I think, I mean, that became the awareness of all that after kind of trying to systematize and build the bones and structure of the strategy became a core focus, So when we look at the statistics before the pandemic, I mean, and the pandemic it just leveled the resilience of our caregivers. But even before that, there was so much data around burnout, almost, I think it was almost 50%. I'd have to look back, but almost 50% of physicians were experiencing one or more symptoms of burnout before the pandemic. And it's not unusual for physicians to come out of residency already experiencing symptoms of burnout. It's a really, really difficult, stressful job. And there are amazing people that sign up to do it. I think in my experience, which is I just did the math. I guess now it's about 50,000 folks. But in my experience, it was just there wasn't a lot of training around managing symptoms of burnout and how to prevent burnout. So some of the things that we tried to do, and some of them are just as simple as pulling things from other high stress situations like Navy SEALs, right? There's some, I just talked to someone yesterday who's an amazing leader and has a company that pulls those leadership principles out from his Navy SEAL training and takes physicians and clinicians through it because there's a lot of similarities in the level of stress and the level of trauma. But things as simple, the Navy SEALs do something called box breathing, just like what it sounds. You breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4. You do a cycle of that 3 times. It brings kind of control back to your prefrontal cortex, which you have to have. You're making
Yeah.
decisions with patients or whatever it might be, or you're storming a beach, I don't know. But just some of those simple practices like box breathing, being able to go to a coworker and say, hey, I need 10 minutes of your time today. And I just want to lay out what I'm feeling. And, if you can just listen to me, that would be awesome. And they're just some basic things that don't come along with med school, and there's not a whole lot around health practices that come with med school. Nutrition. Mm-mm. So
I was about to go there to the nutrition.
Yeah, so try
Um,
to fill in some of those gaps in a way that just says, here's, here's some information. And again, how can we have defaults in your environment that are nourishing your well-being, kind of without you having to think about it, because you got enough to think about. So can the physician lounge be packed with things that are going to nourish you and sustain your energy throughout the day, or is it packed with Pop-Tarts and donuts and licorice? I had a nephrologist that lived off of licorice. I don't know how she did it. Um, but it's fruits, vegetables, salad. It's all there for you, physician, whenever you want it. And that's you don't even have to think about it, right? This is part of our environment. And you have a pod over here that's quiet. You can close your eyes, you can rest for a minute, you can take a nap. So they're just some of those things in the environment that are kind of missed opportunities. And so trying to kind of drive those things forward definitely made a difference for sure.
what have you seen in the nutritional field that's changed the last, I don't know, 20 years or so? I remember when I was growing up, the food pyramid was still on all the boxes and of crackers, which are anyways. Um, but I feel like the last 5 to 10 years has been well, part of it is probably because I've become an adult in those 5 to 10 years and started paying attention to things. Um, but stuff that I didn't even know, like I remember growing up, it was like, oh, the sandwich is like a healthy thing. Like Subway is like healthy. And then you look at what's in the bread and you're like, okay, well, this is not even really bread. There's a bunch of other stuff in here. And then you wonder why if I eat two sandwiches from the dining hall, like I'm gaining weight. But I was like, well, I'm not eating ice cream cones and fried things, but I'm eating sandwiches. That shouldn't happen that way. And you like do some Googling and you're like, oh, well, that's not good. Um, what are some of the things that you've seen change over the course of your career, and what are some maybe I don't know, we'll start with that one and then we'll see where that takes us.
Well, I'm not a dietitian or a nutritionist, so it is not my expertise by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll only, I'll touch on it from my own experience, but not as a nutrition scientist. But it is interesting. To kind of see the evolution through the years, right? Low fat, no fat. My poor family, I took them through a pretty short-lived no fat phase. And if anybody remembers, no fat cheese was just like rubber. It was just awful.
So
Um,
so bad.
Somehow they kept me, but all those phases kind of came through. And I think what seems abundantly clear now that we weren't really talking about, everyone is clear that sugar is bad. Added sugar, bad. No one can argue with that. And so when I pulled soda machines out of the health system, the Southern California health system, um, that people were a little grumpy
Did you
about
get a
that.
lot of resistance for that?
Um, well, a couple things. The CEO sent out a letter saying, hey, this is why we're doing that. We have a responsibility to be a model in our community, and having a cafeteria that is filled with a soda station and added sugar soda, it's not a good example. So we're not going to do that anymore. So was there a little bit of crying and gnashing of teeth for a week? Maybe. But no one could argue that this is a huge contributor to diabetes and other massive health related issues, obesity, all kinds of things. You can't make a case for sugar. You just can't. And so there are a few things that I think we can't argue about anymore, right? So that's one. I think having a diet that is rich, 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 rich in fruits and vegetables, I don't think we can argue about that, right? I don't think we can argue about high fiber foods. So I feel like we've been able to kind of lean in to some of the things that are just, it's obvious, it's clear. We don't need any more research. We know this is bad. We know this is good. And so that's kind of where I have kind of tried to lean in. And certainly in my Blue Zones work, Blue Zones is kind of in the Mediterranean diet. That diet continues to rank at the top of the healthiest diets as far as contributing towards longevity. And so that's what I do personally. And that's what I tend to recommend for people. But Blue Zones is very much about adding uh, as more than it is about taking away.
Yeah. For those listening who don't know what the Mediterranean diet is, can you describe it in like for I don't know, the simple version?
Yeah. Whole grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, and lean meats, typically fish. So not, I don't think it's completely, void of things like red meat, but it's rare. But
Yeah.
it's all about whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and some kind of lean protein.
Yeah,
Lean
for sure.
on the beans.
Um, what are your thoughts on these sort of diet? I don't know if they're fads, but like stuff like keto and other things. I know you mentioned you're not a nutrition scientist or anything like that, but I think for me, kind of what all these things boil down to, whether it's keto or a Mediterranean type diet or any of these, even like the low carb ones, really what you're cutting out, and if you kind of aggregate across all of them, is or what you're trying to cut out is just processed stuff. And I guess where I'm going with that is, what are your thoughts on the seems like there's a been a big increase in like chronic disease. Like I used to not know people with maybe allergies to different things, or now I know people with like Crohn's and people who have just like chronic inflammation. Like people that shouldn't be, like people that were athletes that now it's like this is totally inflamed, and it's like why? Why is that inflamed? And then I spend, well, maybe it's the right amount of time reading ingredients lists at the grocery store. But for example, um, I went to go get some like tortilla or corn chips because we were having like a gathering. So we had some guacamole and something to dip it in. I could not find I looked at 11 different bags of chips and I could not find one that did not have canola oil or like some sort of seed oil or like other
Um,
just stuff that I couldn't pronounce in it. And it's like, is there not one chip that doesn't just have like olive oil,
sure.
tortilla, and like flour and water or whatever. Like there's nothing. There's nothing.
It's harder to find. We have an abundance of processed food, and that is not helping us. Inflammation is really complex, right? There's so
Yeah.
many. Is food part of that picture and puzzle? Absolutely.
But as a corporate, like when you're doing corporate wellness, that's a big thing because a lot of people, right, they've got kids and they're sitting at their desk all day, and so diet is a very big component to that. So is I guess what I'm asking is how do you go about kind of educating people on like even though this looks like it could or should be healthy, like how do you educate and help people recognize what is a good thing to eat? Because like for example, you could say rice and bread is both carbs and and the bread is says it's whole grain on it. But then if you look at the ingredients list, like there's a bunch of other stuff in there and it's like that's probably not a good idea. Like how do you go about educating people who maybe don't have the background or requisite knowledge. Like most people don't read the ingredients list on 11 bags of chips in the grocery store, stand there like a crazy person, like going like this.
Yeah,
But like how do you go about doing that when you're advising people and companies on things to look for, or even what they're buying for, oh, we're having a company gathering. It's like, okay, you should get this type of thing and not that.
yeah,
Outside of don't get pizza. It's like, okay, well, yes, we got that part. But like how do you go about doing that? Like if you're gonna dive a little bit deeper with a client.
yeah. That's a great question. And no, you're kind of an anomaly, right? Like not many people are going to go
Oh
through
yeah.
50 bags of chips in the chip aisle. So a couple different things. In the Southern California health system, one of the things that we did was we just created guidelines, catering guidelines, guidelines for the cafeteria. And what was great about that opportunity is so we built that cafeteria and had the opportunity to really craft it again in a way with behavioral economics. So an example is that you could get, I don't know, maybe Friday was or Tuesday was Taco Tuesday or something. Your taco came with brown rice. If you wanted white rice, you could have it, but it wasn't the default for your taco. So those are some things that we did, and we educated people why, but if they wanted it, they still had the ability to get it. If they wanted a hamburger with cheese, it came without cheese on a whole wheat bun, but they could get it with cheese for an extra buck, something like that. So anyway, so those are some of the things, but then we would hold cooking classes. I think so, again, I love behavioral economics. There are kind of three core principles in behavioral economics that I fall back on time and time again. I call it AMPed because that's the easiest way for me to remember it. It's autonomy. It's that ability to choose, right? Which is so important. No one likes really being told what to do. And it's mastery, it's skill building, and it's purpose. So having people feel connected to their personal purpose and kind of mission and purpose in the work, huge. But doing that mastery part, that skill building part is essential. So to your point, what we would do is we would hold cooking classes, and we would teach people what this label looked like. We would talk about oils with higher smoke points, what breaks down. So you would do some things like that, or employees would submit their favorite recipe. And we would make that and talk about how to make it healthier. Like, do you want to use lard? No, don't use lard. So a lot of that is just skill building, educating, meeting people where they are. Um, and that part is huge. And again, it's the basics, like, hey, shop around the outside of the grocery store.
Yeah.
You're going to look at, a couple things on a label, look at grams of sugar, added grams of sugar, and look at fiber. If those chips have 0 grams of fiber, or that, there's a kind of a gluten-free cracker that I like that kind of sounds healthy. It has 0 grams of fiber. I don't get it. Like it's processed, right? But it has some of that labeling that you're like, oh, gluten-free, this might be healthy. So I think it's kind of meeting people where they are and giving them commercials of bite-sized information that they're able to go, oh, I've never thought about paying attention to fiber. I've never thought about paying attention to added sugar. And it's those little things that compound over time when people start to bring that knowledge together.
Yeah. Even for like protein bars, for example, if you go down the protein bar aisle, um, I've settled on this brand called RX bars because it's the only one where there's no like chemicals in it, even though it's got slightly less protein than some of the other ones. Um, but yeah, it's it's very difficult, and other I can't imagine how difficult it must be to just look at a label, and if you don't have like I've done research, and even I find it difficult to like sort through different things in the label, and it's like I can imagine you like going to the store and just seeing things and a bunch of words that you have no idea what they mean, and you're just like, nah, I don't even. So I'll just put it in the cart. It's fine because like I think it'll taste good, and I don't I don't know. I feel like that's maybe just one example of a larger kind of symptom in our society and culture, and that things are going so fast and it's so hard to keep track of everything that's going on, um, and how to make good decisions. And people are kind of just like focus on what they're like, put the blinders on, focus on my family, my kids, my own immediate like things, and so it's tough to really pay attention to all those things. Um, When you mentioned behavioral economics, is that kind of like incentive structures as well are kind of baked into that a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay, that makes
absolutely.
sense.
Things like loss aversion, right?
Yeah.
It's like people are more motivated. You would think that people are more motivated by like, hey, I can earn this $10, then I might have $10 taken away, but that's not really true. It's hard to do that type of incentive in an employee well-being space. So let's say I don't like this type of incentive. I'm actually not huge on incentives, but I'll just use this as an example. Hey, Eric, we're gonna support you to get your annual wellness visit, right? So we want you to do that. We know that having a relationship with your primary care provider, even in your 20s, is a really good thing. So we're gonna
Guilty. I'm not good at that.
just I don't know. That's kind of a normal thing. So anyway, but hey, we think we know that's important. That's more important actually than us having a biometric screening here. Like, well, have a relationship with your primary care provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to believe that you're going to do that. We're going to give you $50. Um, and by the end of the year, you just need to turn in an attestation that your physician signs. Simple. If you don't, we're taking that $50 back. That's loss aversion. And it's much more motivating than saying, if you do it and submit a form, we'll give you $50. But that's a really difficult incentive to do in a workplace, especially with a lot of people, right? So
Yeah.
15,000 employees. So some things work for incentives, some things don't. I'm not huge on the incentive bandwagon because there are a lot of pitfalls with that the further along you go.
Yeah, there could be other like social incentives as well. If it's getting pushed by corporate leadership or something, and then all of a sudden you see like you're working in a team of 10 or whatever, and all of a sudden eight of them are going on walks all the time, and you're the one that's not. It's like that's a social kind of incentive to is like not be the outsider in that group. Humans are very weird in that way, where it's like you think that you're like, you know what? I'm not gonna do that. And then all of a sudden we watch them all go, and then it's like you change your mind. It's like, oh, I'll go too. It's
It's
like,
the FOMO wellness
yeah,
strategy. I'm
yeah,
all about
yeah,
it. Yeah, I love it.
yeah. You mentioned blue zones.
Mhm.
I think for those listening that don't know what it is, I did some Googling and I don't think I quite understand maybe. So can you describe a little bit what that is and then how you got involved?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, Blue Zones, the shortcut for learning about Blue Zones is to watch the Netflix series. So, there's a Netflix series that came out, How to Live to 100, about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer.
Hmm.
It's fantastic, but it goes back to National Geographic explorer Dan Buettner, who pulled together a team. I was kind of tasked by National Geographic to go find the areas in the world where people live the longest and healthiest disease-free lives. So where were the highest concentration of centenarians? So Dan pulled together this team of longevity experts and statisticians and all these different types of folks, traveled the world and found five key areas, five original areas called blue zones. They were called blue zones because they marked the spaces on a map with a blue pen. And so they became blue zones, not as scientific or as special as you might think. But the five originals are Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and the only one in the United States is Loma Linda, California, which is home to the Seventh-day Adventist. So those are the five originals. And what's super interesting about these five different areas in the world is that they have common threads that run through all of them that contribute to their longevity. And you look at these nine core things and you think, okay, none of it is rocket science at all. It's things like right outlook, so our purpose. And the Okinawan word for that is called ikigai. It's just loosely translated means why you get up every day, right? So knowing what your purpose is, what's your purpose and place in the world. So that's a big one. Downshifting, natural movement. So, the centenarians in these areas, they don't go to the gym. They just move all day long. They're walking up hills, they're grinding corn for their tortillas, they're doing all kinds of natural movement all day long. They're big on connection. So family first, a sense of belonging, the right tribe or positive pack. They have people that they hang out with that, kind of like you were talking about earlier, those social norms, that peer pressure. If everybody's kind of doing things a certain way, you're going to be more inclined to do that. And so that's a big part of what they do. And then they eat plants. They're big on the plants. They're not vegetarians, but they eat lots and lots of plants and beans. So these nine core threads are called the Power Nine in Blue Zones. And there's a compounding longevity effect when those are all kind of just on fire in someone's life. So it's a really, I think, great and inspiring story to look at because it says anybody, I mean, these are all things that you don't have to live in, Ikaria, Greece, or Sardinia, Italy. These are things that you can do right where you are today.
Hmm. How did you become involved?
Yeah. So when this research first came out, which has been almost 15 years, and I was leading the well-being strategy for the Southern California health system, I just loved it. And there's other spaces, other places that you can find longevity research, and it's a hot topic right now, I'm sure, as you know, whether it's, I was pulling it from Gallup, who had been doing research on a group of people that they had originally called the oldsters. I don't think that's politically correct anymore. That's what they were calling them at the time. But I was pulling that information from Gallup. They've got amazing research around well-being and longevity, and there's some other great places now that have really stepped into this. But when I was doing that, I pulled in that Blue Zones research, and the original Blue Zones research was presented in a TED Talk by Dan Buettner. You can Google that, it's a good one. But every time I was on the leadership faculty training our leaders and our teams, I would show that TED Talk, and we would pull out the Power Nine and incorporate that into that personal practice of well-being. So I had been working with that research for a long time. So when I had the opportunity to actually officially become part of Blue Zones, implement and operationalize that research and work at Adventist Health, that was a dream come true. It was just a lot of fun.
How So if you'd already been kind of using the work and the research, what was the difference between like, okay, you're using the work and now you're officially using the work, but you're still using the work? It doesn't seem like a big, maybe just like a title change almost, or but I guess how did they reach out to you to officially become part of it, or like how did that all work out? Because it's I can imagine you not necessarily would not want to do that, but I can imagine that you would have reaching out to them to officially be part of what they were doing was not really on the radar because you were already doing it anyways.
Yeah, yeah. No, during the pandemic, my well-being department closed.
Ah,
Yeah, at my other hospital where it had been almost 12 years, so for quite a while. So it was right after that Adventist Health reached out to me, and so through a variety of kind of unique contacts. So that's how that happened, and it couldn't have been, like I said, a more amazing opportunity for sure.
so now you're on your own doing consulting things. What was that something that you had thought of that you'd always thought about maybe 5, 10 years ago? You're like, oh, one day this would be nice, and then you would just wait for the right moment, or was this um, like how did that happen? How were the discussions like with your family, right? Because I know you pull the trigger on a stable sort of income to, well, here we go. It's like how was that for you and for your family, and how were those discussions? What was the planning like? I can imagine, right? Everyone's always says getting your first customer is the hardest one. You've built up a network of people and companies over the course of your career. How was that whole kind of transition into entrepreneurship like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's new for sure. But when I had that kind of moment gap when during COVID, my department closed and my entire team was let go, um, I was thinking about consulting then, strongly thinking about it and considering it. So, but I hadn't gotten too far down the path. So, as I wrapped up my work at Blue Zones this year, I really am excited about kind of taking all of the experience, lessons. I don't like saying expertise. It's more about lessons, what you learn, what the takeaways have been, and just being able to share and support a variety of clients. That's what I love. So that's the space I'm wading into. And because my sons, I mentioned when we started, they're all out and starting their own families. So I'm in a season where I get to ask, what does this make possible? Right.
Yeah.
And so I just have a strong sense that that's kind of my path. And so that's where I'm headed at the moment. And I'm excited about the opportunity to both work with employers and kind of lean a little harder into some of the longevity research, which takes me back to some of my personal training days where I just saw the incredible difference it made in some of my older clients. And so that's a space that I also am kind of pushing into as well, as far as talking with seniors and senior living communities and different spaces to kind of incorporate some of these best practices because it can make the last years of someone's life the best years.
Can I just say, if you let your corporate wellness team go during a time when everyone is the most stressed, that seems like a poor decision, um, to me. You can neither agree nor disagree for the sake of this going on the internet. But that just it seems silly. I'm sure there's tons of stuff that went on behind the scenes or whatever, but COVID really the way that people oh, I just it irks me a lot. It irks me a lot how COVID was, especially how what sorts of things were shut down and what sorts of things weren't, and what sorts of people were let go and what sorts of people weren't. Um, and there's definitely people who took the time that they were allotted. It's like, okay, I don't have to go into the office anymore. I'm going to do something else with that. But there's also people who then were isolated and like people in your position would have been vitally important during that time. And I don't know. It irks me a lot. I don't really have a question on the end of that. It's just something that I don't know. I like just watching it, just watching it happen too. Like I have friends that kind of spiraled a little bit, or and they're doing better now. But it just like watching it happen and either not being able to help them because of whatever restrictions were in place at the time. It's like really, you're not gonna like I can't go for a walk outside in this park because you got a cop sitting there. It's just like oh, I don't know. It irks me. Some of the stuff, of course, the decision making that happened, we didn't know some things or whatever, but still, it just like I don't know. Maybe personally, I feel like the lockdowns did more harm than good in a variety of areas, and you and your team getting let go is another kind of notch in the arrow of like this was not very handled very well. Um, so I don't know that. Well, you can have thoughts on that if you want, or we can move on.
I hear what you're saying. I think one of the things that the pandemic did well is that it made it abundantly clear that well-being is has to be a top priority for organizations. And mental health has to be a top priority. And loneliness and social isolation is very, very bad. Those that all became abundantly clear. And I really hope, Eric, that we don't forget those lessons because those are huge takeaways. And as things start to get further in the rearview mirror, companies start to go, maybe we don't really need to think about, helping our folks and supporting them and immersing them with the tools and resources that they need when they want them. It's up to them, but we're going to create an environment that empowers them to be their best self here, and we want them to have all the resources that they could ever need. So I hope we take some of those lessons. I think a lot of mistakes probably were made. People were trying to do the best they could, and there was a lot of different things going on. But I think the thing that we haven't recovered from, well, there's still a lot of things, but I think the loneliness and social isolation is killing us still. I don't think we've recovered
Hmm.
from that. There's some older research. It's about a 20-year-old study, but this particular study said that chronic social isolation was like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It is
Oof.
really, really detrimental to our health. So we have to address that, and I think that's maybe the huge pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Our country right now is that we have a loneliness kind of epidemic, I should say. So,
Yeah. I completely agree. Like I can say mostly for certain that if I was not well, she's my wife now, but if my girlfriend and I were not living together at the time and I didn't have soccer and I was isolated, like those two things for sure got me through that level of isolation. And the people I know that didn't do well were single at the time, didn't have a team that they were playing with that wasn't going out to train. Like as soon as the fields opened up, we were back on the fields. Even like doing some of the, so we're like, well, we don't have to be 6 feet to pass the ball to each other. We're like, we'll stand far apart and do long passes. And it's like, but you still see people. Um, and so yeah, the loneliness and the isolation for sure. Yeah, it's just I guess to those listening, like find friends, find good friends, hang out with them as much as you can, family, all of that. Um, I had a segue that I was going to go to, and I forgot what it was. Um, hmm. We'll go with this then. What are some lessons that you've learned over the course of your career that for somebody listening, like these are two or three basic but super important things that have massive impact or even little compounding impacts over time? What are some of like the biggest, most consistent things that you've seen, like patterns that you've seen over the course of your career?
Well, I mean, they're all pretty basic. Again, not rocket science. I think one of the most evidence-based approaches to well-being that impacts every element of well-being is exercise. We talk about brain health, we talk about mental health, cardiovascular strength. Exercise is probably far and away one of the best things that we can do for ourselves. And doing exercise an hour a day in the gym and then sitting at a desk and then sitting at home watching Netflix for like 3 hours probably is not doing it. So, how can you really incorporate natural movement into your day and having a thoughtful approaches to how you're approaching strength training, cardiovascular training, all of those good things. You just I think it's one of the most powerful things that you can do for your body is to exercise. Other thing, again, basic, just more vegetables. Eat plants and beans. If you can start to OD on those things, it's gonna be good for you. I think that's big. And then I think probably the third is that social piece, and it's really being intentional to spend time with friends. Yeah, the people that you love, right? Because they are the greatest resource that I think we have in our lives. And being intentional to call people, connect with people, that is just a powerful, powerful driver for well-being. So those are the biggies for me. And if I'm encouraging someone to start somewhere, it's with those three.
Yeah, those are great. What's next for you? The next we'll say 3-ish years. What's the plan? What's the if everything goes perfectly, you can wave a magic wand and you're like, this is exactly what I want it to be. What are you looking at for the next couple of years?
Well, I'm really looking forward to some good projects. So working with some different organizations around that kind of immersive employee well-being experience. So super pumped to do some project work around that. Also some project work with some senior living communities. Again, I've kind of built out a longevity framework that just kind of takes the longevity research from all the different places that are doing great work: Oxford Wellbeing Center, Harvard Flourishing Center, Blue Zones, Gallup, and kind of running what those communities are doing through that framework, so that they can really have also an integrated, immersive approach to their residents in that community. So those are the two big ones, and I'm looking forward to doing some keynote speaking. So I've got a couple of those that I'm kind of working on, and spending time with my family. That's a great thing about being a consultant, is having a little more autonomy, and so I'm excited about that as well.
Awesome. Talk a little bit about the keynote stuff. Is that a new thing for you that you've picked up recently?
No,
No?
yeah, I've been speaking for a long time. So, and
How do you like it?
I love it. I totally love it. The last thing I did was at the Hero Enhancement Research Organization. I think that was last year. Prior to that, I did a nursing symposium based on Florence Nightingale, but always integrated with kind of well-being and some in the science around well-being. So I love that. I'm always really grateful for the opportunity to share and to serve, any organization that wants that. So love it, and it's a joy to do that.
Yeah. Any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Oh my gosh. Well, I need to know what position you play in your team.
Anywhere on the defense or center mid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Good.
usually right back or six or center mid, but definitely played some left back and some center back in some pinch moments as well.
Okay. I just needed to know. I spent a lot of time at stopper and right half.
They're
So
the same positions then. So six is like center defensive mid, and then yeah, right back as well. Same things.
yeah, absolutely. But no final words. It's just been a great conversation, and I hope your folks listening just feel empowered to take away a few things and start a few things because it matters now. Like what you're doing now, you think, oh, I'll start doing some of that stuff when I have a family or I'm older. It really has a compounding effect over time. So I hope some of these principles and practices your folks, your listeners will kind of embrace and start doing right away.
Yeah, for sure. Where can they find you or your business or whatever? Where are the links if they're interested in learning more, supporting, or where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the best thing is to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm there frequently. You can find me at Melanie Cumbee. We can, do a link to the podcast if you want, but that's probably the easiest and fastest way to connect with me.
Sounds good. With that, guys, thank you guys for listening as always, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Thanks.